The October wind carried a sharp edge as it swept through Riverside Park, shaking loose the golden maples and crimson oaks that lined the walking paths. The leaves spiraled down like tiny flames, crunching under passing footsteps, yet David Miller hardly noticed the beauty of it. His gaze was locked on the bench where his daughters sat. Emma and Lily, identical in every way, wore the red dresses they loved, their small legs swinging above the ground, their eyes open but unseeing. They were 7 years old, yet they had never laid eyes on a sunset, never known the color of the sky, never seen his face. David had built an empire before he was 30. The Miller name was printed across patents, software suites, and technology ventures. His private jet stood waiting at the airstrip. His penthouse overlooked the Cincinnati skyline, and his bank accounts carried numbers so vast even he rarely glanced at them. But none of it mattered when he looked at his children. Wealth had bought him access to the best doctors in Zurich, experimental treatments in Boston, and genetic researchers in Tokyo. He had written checks with more zeros than he cared to count, hoping one signature might open his daughter's world to light. Yet here they were still blind, still waiting for a miracle that never came. "Daddy, are the leaves pretty today?" Emma's voice was soft, a feather drifting into his heart. Her hand lifted into the air as though she could catch the answer. With her fingers, David swallowed, his throat dry. How could he explain the sea of gold and scarlet around them to two children who had never known color? "They're beautiful, sweetheart," he managed, though his voice cracked. "The trees look like they're on fire, bright and glowing." Lily turned her head toward him, her eyes those pale, empty eyes fixing somewhere above his shoulder, like candles on a cake. He forced a smile though his chest ached. "Yes, just like that." The wind carried laughter then, but not from his daughters. David turned and saw a boy, no older than 8, crouched near the playground. His shirt was stained, his jeans torn at the knees, and his sneakers looked ready to fall apart. He held a small plastic wand dipped into a bottle of soap solution, blowing carefully until iridescent bubbles floated into the air. They shimmered like glass, catching sunlight, drifting toward the bench where Emma and Lily sat. The twins stiffened. At first David thought the wind had startled them, but then Emma tilted her head sharply, her lips parting in awe. "Daddy, do you feel that?" she whispered. Lily reached out, her hand brushing the air until a bubble burst against her palm. She gasped. "It's warm and cold at the same time." David blinked, his heart thudding. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The boy kept blowing, sending more bubbles across the grass. Emma giggled suddenly, her arms waving with uncanny precision as if she could trace the floating orbs. "It's like sparkles," she said breathlessly. "I could feel them dancing." David stared, stunned. His daughters had never reacted like this to anything. No therapy, no device, no experimental treatment had ever awakened such wonder, and yet here they were, blind from birth, describing sensations beyond reason. The boy looked up at David then, his eyes far older than his face, steady and calm. "Don't worry, mister," he said softly, almost apologetically. "I'm just sharing what my mama taught me. She always said God gives us different ways to see." David stood frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. The billionaire in him demanded explanations, data, medical charts, but the father in him saw something else. The little girls, smiling through blindness, reaching out toward invisible colors carried on the breath of a poor boy with a bubble wand. For the first time in years, hope flickered, and David could not look away. The next afternoon, David Miller returned to Riverside Park earlier than usual. The autumn air carried a sharper chill, the kind that whispered of winter's approach. He had dressed his daughters again in the red dresses they insisted were lucky, their hair neatly brushed and tied with matching ribbons. The twins sat on the same bench, their small hands folded patiently in their laps, their heads tilting at every sound of laughter drifting from the playground. "Is he here yet, Daddy?" Emma asked for the 5th time in 10 minutes, her sightless eyes scanning the air as though they could pull the boy from thin air. David's chest tightened. He had spent the entire night replaying yesterday's scene, watching his daughters giggle and reach toward bubbles as if they could see them. He hadn't felt such fragile hope in years, and the memory gnawed at him. What if it had only been a fluke? What if the boy never returned? "Maybe," David murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring them or himself. At exactly 3 o'clock, as if summoned by their hope, the boy appeared. His clothes were just as worn, his hair unkempt, but his eyes carried that same steady light David remembered. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a woman, thin, frail, and leaning heavily on her son's small shoulder. Her hospital gown was hidden beneath an oversized coat, but David could see the paleness of her face, the way her lips trembled with each shallow breath. She clutched a handkerchief that bore crimson stains. "Tommy," the twins cried in unison. Their voices so full of joy it startled David. He had forgotten how sweet his daughter sounded when excitement replaced their usual quiet despair. The boy's face lit up, but the woman tugged him back. "Tommy," she said hoarsely, "we talked about this. We don't belong here." David rose, his instinct to approach carefully. "Mom, please, wait. Your son did something incredible yesterday. My daughters," his voice broke, "they felt something they've never felt before." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She lowered her head. "I'm sorry if he disturbed you, Tommy. He's always been different, ever since his daddy died. He sees things other people don't." She coughed violently into the handkerchief, and David saw more blood. Tommy looked up, determined despite the weight of his mother's hand. "I brought the special mix today," he announced proudly, pulling a small glass jar from his pocket. "My daddy's recipe. He said bubbles carry wishes to heaven." David stood rooted to the ground as the boy dipped the wand into the jar and blew. The bubbles that floated out seemed no different at first glance, delicate spheres shimmering with rainbow light. But the effect on Emma and Lily was immediate. Emma gasped, lifting a trembling finger into the air. That one's yellow, isn't it, Tommy? Like sunshine?" David's stomach lurched. His little girl had never seen yellow. She couldn't even grasp the concept of sunshine beyond the warmth on her skin. Yet she pointed with uncanny precision at a drifting bubble. Tommy's mouth fell open. "Yes," he whispered. "That one's yellow." Lily joined in, her hands fluttering in front of her. "And that one's blue, like the sky you told us about." David's breath caught in his throat. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he recorded the impossible scene. His daughters blind from birth, their optic nerves undeveloped. Every doctor had sworn were now naming colors they should not know. The woman, Maria, collapsed onto the bench beside him, her voice barely audible. "His daddy could do it, too," she whispered. "Before the accident, he'd make these bubbles for the children at the hospital. Said it wasn't about eyes. Said it was about hearts connecting." David turned toward her, overwhelmed. "Do you realize what your son has just done? He's given my girls their first taste of sight." Maria looked at him, her eyes wet. "Or maybe he's given them something even greater." The twins squealed again, their arms reaching out toward the bubbles with unerring accuracy. Their laughter echoed across the park, carrying more weight than any medical breakthrough David had ever read about. But just as the miracle blossomed, a dark thought stabbed through his chest. What if this boy disappeared again? What if the fragile woman beside him collapsed and never returned? What if yesterday had not been a fluke, but today was the last chance? His billionaire instinct surged. David Miller had built empires by seizing opportunity before anyone else recognized its worth. But now the stakes were not profit or power. They were his daughter's joy, something priceless, something irreplaceable. As Emma clapped her hands in delight and Lily whispered about blue skies, David made a silent vow. Whatever it cost, whatever it required, he would not let this boy or his dying mother vanish from their lives. And in that quiet, desperate promise, David felt a shiver of fear. Because for the first time in his career, he wasn't in control. Something bigger than wealth or logic was at play, and it terrified him. The air in Riverside Park had changed. What began as a quiet autumn afternoon filled with children's laughter and falling leaves had turned into something David Miller could hardly explain. His twin daughters, blind since birth, trapped in darkness, were now naming colors, reaching toward bubbles as if they truly saw them, and the boy, Tommy, only 8 years old, was the key to it all. Yet as the twins squealed with joy, David noticed something else. Maria, the frail woman who had arrived with Tommy, slumped on the bench beside him. Her breathing was ragged, and each cough tore at her chest. She clutched her handkerchief tightly, crimson blooming across the fabric. David leaned closer, alarm tightening his gut. "You need a doctor," he said firmly, the businessman in him already calculating hospitals and specialists. Maria shook her head weakly. "No insurance. They turn us away, or they give us pills that don't do a thing. Tommy needs me at home. I can't." She coughed again, her body folding under the weight of it. David clenched his fists. He had spent fortunes on cutting-edge treatment for his daughters, flown them to the most expensive clinics in the world. Yet this woman was dying on a park bench for lack of money. It stung him with a shame he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Tommy seemed oblivious to everything except the twins. He twirled, laughing, as he sent another stream of bubbles into the sky. Cast the green one. He cried. Emma pointed directly at a bubble drifting past her ear. There, it's green. I know it. Lily's face glowed with wonder. Daddy, it feels like the grass under my feet. David's heart throbbed. His daughters weren't only feeling, they were translating sensation into images, into color. It was impossible, and yet it was happening before his eyes. But as he turned toward Maria, her head dropping against her chest, his awe collided with dread. This fragile woman held the answers through her son, but she might not live long enough to share them. Maria, David said urgently, I can get you help. Real help. My resources. She cut him off with a faint shake of her head. Your world is not ours. Mr. Miller, people like you, they don't stay. Tommy and I, we don't belong here. David opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden shrill voice broke through the park. David, what are you doing here? He froze. His ex-wife, Sarah, was striding toward them, designer sunglasses perched on her head. Her phone clutched like a weapon. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted the twins chasing bubbles in their blind, stumbling way. Then she noticed Tommy and Maria. Who are these people? She demanded, her tone sharp enough to slice through the children's laughter. David bristled. They're friends. Tommy's helping the girls. Sarah scoffed, flipping her hair. Helping David. They're blind. Nothing is going to change that. You're filling their heads with fantasies. Do you really want to set them up for disappointment? Again, Emma and Lily's laughter faltered. They shrank at the sharpness in their mother's voice, clinging to each other. Tommy stepped protectively in front of them, his small shoulders squared. They're not imagining, he said boldly. They're seeing in their own way. Sarah's lips curled in disdain. And who are you to say that, boy? Look at you, you can't even keep your clothes clean. David's jaw tightened. He had tolerated Sarah's arrogance for years, but today something snapped. Enough, Sarah. Can't you see? They're happy. They're laughing. When was the last time you saw that? Sarah crossed her arms, glaring at Maria. This is pathetic. You're letting strangers meddle with their emotions. If you keep this up, I'll go back to court and make sure you never have custody. Our daughters deserve stability, not this circus. Maria, pale and trembling, lowered her gaze. Her hand brushed Tommy's shoulder, urging him back. The boy looked torn between retreat and defiance, his eyes burning with something. David recognized fear of losing the only family he had left. The tension thickened, every second stretching like a wire ready to snap. The twins clutched Tommy's hands, refusing to let go. Daddy, don't let her take him away, Emma whispered desperately. In that moment, David realized the impossible had already happened. His daughters, blind from birth, were no longer living in a world of shadows. Tommy had given them more than hope. He had given them a reason to believe. He stood taller, his voice steady but fierce. Sarah, you can threaten me all you want, but I won't take this from them. Not again. Not ever. Sarah's face flushed with fury, but David didn't flinch. He wrapped his arms around the twins, pulling Tommy close as well. For the first time in years, he felt like more than a man of wealth. He felt like a father fighting for his children's light. Yet as Maria swayed unsteadily and nearly collapsed onto the bench, David's victory soured into dread. The miracle they had been given was fragile, tied to the boy and his dying mother. And unless he acted fast, it might vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. That night, as his daughters slept with smiles still on their faces, David made a vow. In silence, he would uncover the truth about Tommy's gift. He would fight Sarah's threats, and he would not let Maria die on a park bench. But deep down, he wondered, was he prepared for what that truth might cost? The night after the confrontation, in Riverside Park, David Miller sat at the edge of his daughters' beds, staring at their sleeping faces. Emma and Lily still clutched each other's hands even in sleep, as if afraid that the colors they had felt in the park might vanish if they let go. For the first time in years, David had watched them laugh freely, not out of forced amusement or polite response, but with genuine joy. That joy had come not from doctors or scientists or expensive clinics, but from a boy with torn jeans and a bubble wand, and from a woman who looked like death was already standing at her shoulder. David's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah, Again. He ignored it, gripping the phone so tightly he nearly cracked the casing. His ex-wife's words from the park still echoed in his mind, threats of custody, accusations of delusion. She would drag him through court again if she thought it would give her control. But he wasn't the same man he had been when they divorced. This time, he wouldn't bend. The following morning, David drove to the free clinic on the east side of the city, a place he had never stepped foot in. His black Bentley drew stares from the weary faces outside. Parents cradled coughing children. Women with tired eyes waited in line, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't cover the stench of poverty. He was out of place, and he knew it inside. It didn't take long to find Maria. She was slumped in a chair near the waiting room, her breath shallow, her lips cracked and pale. Tommy sat beside her, clutching a paper bag filled with medications that looked too cheap to matter. "Mr. Miller," Maria whispered when she saw him, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." David ignored her words, crouching down to meet Tommy's eyes. How long has she been like this? Tommy's small jaw tightened, his eyes shining with a courage that looked borrowed from someone much older. "She's been sick since last year. The doctor said it's her lungs. They won't help her without money, and we don't have any." Maria coughed violently, crimson flecking her handkerchief. David's stomach turned. "This isn't optional anymore," he said firmly. "You're coming with me now." Maria shook her head weakly, fear flickering in her eyes. "No, I won't be your charity project. We've lived without your world all our lives. Your world." David's voice rose, raw and unpolished. "Maria, your son has changed my daughter's lives. Do you think I'm going to stand here and watch you die on a clinic floor? I don't care what it costs. You're coming with me." Tommy looked between them, torn. His small hand found his mother's, gripping it as if to hold her soul inside her frail body. Then he turned to David, his expression filled with both fear and a surprising defiance. "If you help my mom, you don't get to take us away from each other. Promise me that." David blinked at the boy, 8 years old, and already bargaining with the weight of a man. "I promise," he said quietly. Within an hour, Maria was admitted to one of Cincinnati's most advanced hospitals, doctors swarming her frail frame with machines and wires. David used the full weight of his influence, calling in specialists, clearing rooms, demanding immediate treatment. But as he stood outside her door watching, a part of him knew money could not rewrite every fate. Tommy sat on a plastic chair in the hallway, his bubble wand gripped tightly in his hand as if it were his only weapon. David lowered himself, beside him, feeling strangely small in the presence of the boy. "Where did you learn to do this, Tommy?" David asked softly. The boy stared at the floor. "My dad. He used to say bubbles weren't just for playing. He said if you made them with love, they could carry what was inside your heart to someone else. When he got sick, he made bubbles for kids at the hospital. He said sometimes people can see with more than just their eyes." David shivered. It was nonsense to his businessman's mind. Yet the memory of his daughters pointing at colors haunted him. The doctors emerged hours later, their faces grave. Maria's condition was advanced. Tuberculosis, worsened by neglect, perhaps too late for full recovery. But with care, with rest, with proper treatment, there was a chance. That night, as David drove Tommy back to his mansion with Emma and Lily waiting inside, he realized something had shifted. His daughters clung to Tommy as though he were their missing brother, and as David watched them chase each other across the marble floor, guided by their laughter and the bubbles that shimmered in Tommy's wake, he felt it in his bones. This boy wasn't just a miracle for his daughters. He was the hinge on which all their lives now turned. But outside the mansion gates, a black sedan waited in the shadows. Sarah's lawyer sat inside, a file on his lap, gathering evidence for the custody case she was already building. She had seen the boy, she had seen the dying mother, and in her mind, David was unraveling. For David, the battle was no longer just about his daughter's blindness. It was about keeping the fragile miracle alive before the world, whether through sickness, poverty, or Sarah's fear tore it away forever. The days that followed felt like a fragile dream balanced on a knife's edge. David Miller's mansion, once a monument to silence and sterile wealth, now rang with the sound of children's laughter. Emma and Lily, blind since birth, no longer sat withdrawn in their corners. Instead, they trailed after Tommy through hallways and across the sprawling garden, their hands reaching toward bubbles they should not have been able to follow. "Daddy." The purple one feels soft, Emma squealed one morning, her finger darting into the air to touch a bubble that shimmered and burst just above her head. "Mine is red," Lily chimed in, turning unerringly toward another. David stood frozen in the doorway, watching the impossible unfold. His phone was filled with videos, now evidence, he thought, of a phenomenon science couldn't explain. Yet he couldn't bring himself to share them, not even with the specialists he'd trusted in the past. A part of him feared that speaking of it too loudly might shatter the fragile miracle dot, but beneath the laughter, tension curled like smoke. Maria lay upstairs in a guest room, too weak to move without coughing fits. That shook her entire frame. The doctors David hired said her condition was precarious. Each day she lingered was a blessing, but time was not on her side. And outside, another storm brewed. Sarah, his ex-wife, was relentless. She'd seen him at the clinic, seen the boy and his dying mother. Now her lawyer was circling like a vulture, gathering reports, whispering poison into courtrooms about David's unstable choices and reckless influence on their daughters. On the fifth night, the storm broke. David was summoned to a private hearing. Sarah arrived in a tailored black dress, her expression icy as marble. She wasted no time. "Your Honor, my ex-husband is endangering our children. He has brought strangers into their lives, a sick woman and a homeless boy. He's filling their heads with fantasies that will only crush them when reality returns. My daughters deserve medical care, not fairy tales." David sat stiff, his jaw tight, as the twins' voices echoed in his memory, naming colors that no one had taught them. He thought of their faces lighting up for the first time in years when the judge turned to him. David's voice trembled, but did not break. "Your Honor, my daughters are happy. For the first time in 7 years, they're laughing. This boy Tommy has given them what money never could. If believing in colors and bubbles is a fantasy, then it's a fantasy I will protect with everything I have." The judge frowned, uncertain. Sarah smirked, certain she'd won. But just then, the heavy oak doors creaked open. A small figure stumbled into the courtroom. Tommy, his hands clutched his bubble wand, and his wide eyes locked on David's daughters seated beside their mother, Emma. "Lily," he cried, breathless, "I brought Daddy's last recipe." The twins leapt to their feet, their blind eyes shining, their small arms stretched toward the sound of his voice. "Tommy," they shouted together. The courtroom froze as the boy dipped his wand into a small glass vial and blew. Bubbles shimmered into the air, drifting across the silent room. Emma reached forward, her finger landing unerringly on one. "It's gold," she whispered, "and that one is silver," Lily added, her lips trembling with wonder. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes wide. Sarah's smirk faltered, her knuckles whitening on the edge of the table. David rose slowly, his gaze sweeping the stunned faces around him. "Your Honor," he said softly, "you asked for proof. Look at my daughters. Tell me if you've ever seen them this alive." The judge said nothing for a long moment. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I cannot explain what I've just witnessed, but I know children's joy when I see it. The custody case is suspended until further review," Sarah hissed under her breath, gathering her papers in a fury, but David hardly noticed. All he saw were his daughters embracing Tommy as if he were already their brother. Yet later that night, when the children slept and Maria's breathing rattled in the upstairs room, David found Tommy sitting alone in the garden, staring up at the stars. "My dad used to say," the boy whispered without looking up, "that the bubbles weren't just soap. He said they carried pieces of his soul. When he died, he told me to keep making them, so people would never forget the colors of love." David's chest tightened. "Your father, what happened to him?" Tommy's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "He worked at one of your factories. There was an accident. He never came home." The word struck David like a blade. He staggered back, his mind spinning. He had built his empire on efficiency, numbers, profit margins. How many names had he forgotten? How many men had he left behind in the pursuit of wealth? And now, one of those forgotten men had returned through his son with a gift that defied science, humbling the billionaire who had thought he could buy everything. The garden felt colder suddenly, as if the night itself held its breath. David realized then that this wasn't only a story of healing his daughters. It was a story of reckoning. The past he had ignored was standing in front of him, wearing a torn shirt and clutching a bubble wand dot, and if he wanted to keep the miracle alive, he would have to face truths he had spent years burying. Asterisk the following. Week unfolded like a storm that refused to break. Inside David Miller's mansion, Laughter still echoed in the marble halls, carried by the voices of Emma, Lily, and Tommy. The twins clung to him as if he were their missing brother, their blind eyes alight with joy each time his bubbles shimmered through the air. But beneath that joy, shadows lengthened. Maria's illness worsened. Her coughs grew deeper, each spasm racking her frail body until blood stained every cloth she touched. Doctors filled the guest room with machines and whispered terms David barely wanted to hear: terminal, palliative, to late. One evening, as rain pelted the glass windows, David stood by Maria's bedside. She looked impossibly small, her hair plastered against her damp forehead, her breath shallow. Tommy sat beside her, holding her hand in silence, his eyes refusing to leave her face. "You need to rest," David said softly, though his voice trembled. "Let me bring in a specialist from Zurich or Tokyo. I'll fly anyone here. I'll pay whatever it takes." Maria gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "You don't understand, Mr. Miller. There are things your money can't buy. I've lived in shadows long before this sickness came. What matters isn't if I survive, it's that my son has someone when I don't." Tommy's head snapped up, his voice breaking. "Don't talk like that, Mama, please." Her fingers stroked his hair, trembling but gentle. "You've carried me for too long, Tommy. You're only 8. You deserve to be a child." David felt his chest tighten. He had built his life around control, bending the world to his will, but here he was helpless again. He turned away, pacing, trying to bury the guilt that gnawed at him. Maria's words replayed in his head. "Your world is not ours." Yet her son's gift had shattered every truth he thought he knew. That night, unable to sleep, David sat in his office surrounded by files he had demanded from his legal team. He wanted answers about Maria, about Tommy's father, about the accident that had taken him. The documents painted a brutal picture. 10 years earlier, at one of his manufacturing plants, a safety valve had malfunctioned. Workers were exposed to toxic fumes. Most recovered. One did not: Michael Reyes, a janitor, poor, unnoticed. He had filed complaints about safety procedures that were ignored in the rush of production quotas. Compensation had been minimal, and his name had disappeared in a sea of paperwork. David's blood ran cold as the pieces clicked together. Maria Reyes, Tommy Reyes, and Michael, the man whose life had been cut short under his watch, was the one who had given his son the strange gift of bubbles that carried color to the blind. Asterisk. He pressed his palms to his face, shame crushing him. For years he had told himself accidents were just numbers in business, but this boy, whose gift was now transforming his daughter's lives, was the son of one of those numbers. The next morning, Maria collapsed. The mansion erupted in chaos. Doctors rushed into her room, their voices sharp and urgent. Tommy was dragged back by a nurse as he screamed for his mother. Emma and Lily clung to David's legs, their small voices crying out in fear. Hours passed before a doctor stepped into the hall, his face drawn. "She's fading. There's not much more we can do." David entered the room quietly. Maria's eyes fluttered open, glassy but aware. She reached for his hand, her grip shockingly strong for someone so frail. Asterisk. "You have to promise me," she whispered. "Don't let him be swallowed by your world, Tommy. He carries more than you can understand. Don't let anyone take that from him." David's throat burned. "I promise. I swear it." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe your daughters were meant to meet him, to remind you of what matters." Her chest rose once more, then fell, and the room was still. Tommy's wail tore through the air, raw and shattering. He ran to her side, clutching her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "Mama, wake up, please." Emma and Lily reached for him, their tiny hands brushing his shoulders, whispering through their own tears. "It's okay, Tommy. We're here. We're your sisters now." David stood frozen, watching the 3 children cling to one another. The boy, his empire had failed. The daughters, his empire had never been able to heal, and for the first time in his life, he felt stripped bare. The billionaire, the mogul, the man of power, none of it mattered. All that mattered was this fragile circle of children bound together by grief, laughter, and a miracle that defied reason. But in the shadows of that grief, danger stirred, because Sarah had not stopped her war. She had seen the news of Maria's collapse. She had seen the boy's strange bubbles in court. And now she was moving faster than ever, determined to prove David unfit, to take Emma and Lily away from him forever. And if she succeeded, Tommy would be cast back into the streets, alone, his mother gone, his gift dismissed as delusion. David looked out the window at the storm clouds gathering. He knew what was coming. To save his daughters, to keep Tommy safe, he would have to face not only Sarah in court, but also the dark truth of his own empire. And somewhere in that storm waited the final answer, what Michael Reyes had left behind, and why his son's fragile bubbles carried power greater than sight itself. Asterisk, the storm that had been gathering over the Miller estate finally broke. Rain lashed against the glass walls. Thunder rattled the foundation, and inside, silence hung. Heavy, Maria was gone. The guest room that had once carried her faint laughter and whispered reassurances to Tommy now lay hollow, smelling of disinfectant and wilted flowers. She had left her son with nothing but a bubble wand and words David could not forget. Don't let him be swallowed by your world. Tommy refused to leave her side even after the doctors covered her body. His small frame shook with sobs until exhaustion pulled him into a restless sleep. Emma and Lily, though blind, sensed his grief as if it were their own. They curled up beside him on the bed, their tiny arms encircling him, whispering soft promises that he wasn't alone. David stood in the doorway, torn open in ways he had never known. He had buried associates, partners, even family, but nothing had pierced him like this for years. He had believed control came from money, from dominance, in boardrooms, from bending systems to his will. But tonight, he saw control for what it was, a fragile illusion that dissolved under the weight of a child's grief. And then the phone rang. Sarah's voice hissed through the receiver before he could even speak. It's over, David. I've filed for full custody. The court will hear us tomorrow. You've surrounded our daughters with sickness, lies, and now death. They'll see you for the unstable man you are. David's chest burned. They'll see the truth. They'll see what Tommy gave them. Sarah laughed bitterly. Bubbles, colors, you sound insane. Keep this up and you won't just lose them, you'll lose everything. The line went dead. Sleep never came that night. David sat in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey at his elbow, the files on Michael Reyes spread before him. The story gnawed at him. A janitor in one of his plants ignored safety warnings, a preventable accident. A man whose death had been reduced to a line item in a corporate report. And now his son carried a gift that defied science and humbled wealth itself. When dawn came, David walked into the courthouse not as a billionaire, not even as a CEO, but as a father and as a man prepared to face his sins. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Sarah sat rigid, her lawyer armed with files and accusations. The twins sat with David, holding Tommy's hands tightly. Reporters gathered outside, hungry for scandal. The proceedings began coldly. Sarah's lawyer painted a picture of recklessness. Mr. Miller had subjected his blind daughters to delusions, placing them in the care of a homeless boy and his dying mother. This is not parenting, Your Honor. This is negligence dressed as hope. David rose slowly, the weight of the room pressing down. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady though his heart pounded. I could spend hours defending my wealth, my status, my ability to provide, but none of that matters. What matters is what you see in my daughters' faces. He turned to Emma and Lily. Girls, can you tell the court what you see? Emma lifted her chin, her blind eyes glistening. I see yellow, like sunshine on my skin. Lily squeezed Tommy's hand. And blue, like the sky Tommy told us about. I never knew blue felt so light before. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, in disbelief. Then Tommy stood. His voice trembled but carried an unshakable truth. My daddy worked for Mr. Miller. He died because nobody listened to him, but before he went, he taught me that bubbles could carry what's in your heart to someone else. My mama said it wasn't about eyes, it was about love. He dipped his wand into a small vial, the last of his father's secret mix. The courtroom fell silent as bubbles drifted into the air. Emma gasped, pointing, that one's gold. Lily cried, and that one's red. Their voices rang with conviction, their hands tracking the shimmering orbs. Gasps filled the room. Even the judge's stern mask cracked. Sarah sat frozen, her face pale. David's voice broke as he spoke. Your Honor, my daughters have lived in darkness their entire lives. No amount of money, no amount of science ever gave them what this boy did. He gave them colors. He gave them joy. And he is the son of a man I failed, a man who died in my factory because I chose profit over people. If this court finds me unfit, then so be it. But do not call what you see here delusion. Call it what it is, a miracle born from love. The judge sat in silence for what felt like eternity. Then, at last, he said quietly, "Mr. Miller, I do not know how to explain what I've witnessed, but I know authenticity when I see it. This case is dismissed. Custody remains with the father." The gavel struck, and the courtroom erupted. Sarah stormed out, her empire of control collapsing. David turned, tears streaming down his face, and gathered Emma, Lily, and Tommy into his arms. For the first time, he felt whole. That night, back at the mansion, Tommy released the last of his father's bubbles into the sky. They shimmered against the stars, glowing brighter than any David had ever seen. The twins laughed, naming colors, faster than they ever had, and as the bubbles burst into the night, David felt something stir in his heart, a vision, not with his eyes, but with his soul. He saw Michael Reyes, the forgotten janitor, smiling, and he understood the final shocking truth. The miracle was never about sight. It was about redemption, about love so powerful it could pass from father to son, from son to strangers, until it healed what wealth could not. For the first time in years, David didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance at being human. And in that moment, as his daughters laughed and Tommy's bubbles danced in the wind, he vowed never to let the world forget the price of miracles.